Well, hey, Anami, hope you're doing well when you watch this video. So this video is going to be all about part 3 of senses, the ear. Thank you so much for watching. So as we looked at in class, there are hearing tests that you can do. And it's kind of interesting to see, we had some jokes about people not hearing a certain frequency that they should have been able to according to science. But, of course, encourage you to go see a doctor. But nonetheless, we need to protect our ears. We can damage our hair cells in our ears, which you'll find out here in a little bit, and that can lead to hearing loss. Okay, so the ear is the major sense organ for the following things: hearing, equilibrium, and balance. And so the ear functions in hearing and equilibrium and balance, and the receptors are called mechanoreceptors. Okay, and then there's this tune I found a long time ago, my old school, but my sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. But we can be distracted, maybe by our own thoughts or by worldly things, and you can see like the Bible covered up by a lot of other stuff. And so God speaks to us through his word. And so whereas that's obviously a joyful tune graphic, it is important and to ask the Lord to give us hearing ears. Jesus often asked his people who are listening to him and his followers, he who has ears, let him hear, right? And so the hearing ear is something that God makes. And so asking God, the Lord, to give me hearing ears so I can hear what you have to say. Give me hearing ears to hear what your word says and then to obey. And that's more of a heart issue, of course. But so here's the actual ear. I would know this very well, and I would be able to even draw this really well. And so you can see right here that the auricle is on the outside, so the external ear. This is not to scale. So this is actually, these are like, it's way smaller, the inside of the ear compared to the outside of the ear. So it's not to scale. So that's an important feature to kind of remember. But here's the ear canal, or the external acoustic meatus. And then this is your eardrum, tympanic membrane. And then your auditory tube right there to help with air pressures. And then your three smallest bones of your body are malleus, incus, and stapes. And then your inner ear has these semicircular canals, and then the oval window which rests against the stapes, and as the stapes vibrates, it pushes on the fluid in there. And then the acoustic nerve, there's two branches of it, the vestibular branch and the cochlear branch. And then there's the vestibule and the cochlea. Okay, and so all of these are fair to know about, and we're going to go into them right now. Okay, so if the external ear is hearing only, and so it's roughly about 2.5 centimeters in length, the canal, and contains ceruminous glands, and it ends at the tympanic membrane. And we talked about earwax, right? So those cerumen is it can be thick or thin, and we talked about oh man, it's kind of crazy, they use genes, no body odor gene. There's something called a no body odor gene, and it corresponds to dry earwax. And it's pretty crazy to kind of think about how the differences in humanity and just the craziness of genetics and stuff. And so we talked about apocrine secretions, and so a typical secretion, we have smelly sweat, right? Well, those who have this gene, they actually make a different type of signaling process and proteins and stuff, and it actually degrades what could be smelly. And so it's pretty crazy stuff. Okay, so earwax actually has a medical term, cerumen. I think I'm saying that right. Maybe it's cerumen, but it protects the skin of the human ear canal to assist in cleaning and lubrication. Okay, and it protects you. It protects you from bacteria, fungi, insects, and water. Sometimes it can become compacted. A person I know in my life actually deals with this. She has some anatomy issues with her internal ear, and so earwax is more likely to get compacted, and she has to go get it removed by a professional ENT. And so it occludes or blocks hearing, and so hearing can be dampened. The middle ear is hearing only, and so it is involves the ossicles, which are these small bones, the malleus, incus, and the stapes, and it ends in the oval window. Okay, And so that auditory tube connects the middle ear to the throat. And so there's the three bones. Here's the three bones again. And so they amplify. So where's the three bones? Let's circle them. There they are. And so they amplify and transmit the vibration. So what happens, and we'll kind of keep talking about this, but what happens is sound waves come in, hit the tympanic membrane, vibrates all these bones. It increases, or amplifies that signal into the oval window, and that goes into the sense organ or the cochlea, and then the round window displaces the fluid and comes back out, as we watched in class. So there's, of course, suspended. They're not just hanging there. They're suspended by ligaments, and they reflect in response. Okay, so when muscles, when loud, muscles contract, and so there's this tensor tympani muscle, and so it contracts, right? But actually, this is some of the reasons why we have ringing in your ears. Misfiring of this muscle, or damage, or like my pin's not working, damage to the muscle and all sorts of stuff. And we can watch this in class as well. So sound in the external membrane, it hits this meatus, the eardrum, and then it vibrates, transmits the signal this way and into the cochlea, okay, to be heard. All right. Yes, we can have ear infections. They stink. Oh man, it hurts really bad. I remember having one in the mountains. It was like ridiculous. Why is it more common in young people? Because the eustachian tube is, you see how it's more horizontal, more of an angle here, more horizontal here, and so the fluid is more likely to kind of get stuck there or trapped. And so otitis media. And then this is what the ENT is looking for, your doctor. Is it red? Is it inflamed? Is there pus? And that would signal an ear infection. Okay, so the internal ear is by far the hardest part to understand. And this is like micro engineering at its finest. It's crazy. We're just scratching the surface of the complexity here, like barely just getting into the complexity. Of course, whenever we see complexity, I encourage you to see a God who made the complexity. You were created for a purpose, and God is whispering through all of this. Like I am here, and we are here for a reason, and He is here with us. But here's more to scale. It's like, so you can see, like, here's the large outer ear, and then there's those small bones, right? So you can think about how big your ears are, no matter if you have small ears or big ears, and then you can see how small those bones are. And so now we're in the internal ear. So there's three regions: the vestibule, semicircular canals, and the cochlea. And so they're filled with a fluid called perilymph, and similar to cerebral spinal fluid, if you can remember from our nervous system talk. And then there's a labyrinth. So it's a series of membranous sacs and ducts, and it's also filled with fluid, but this is called endolymph. So right here, you can see the various parts. Okay, so there's like a bony labyrinth, and then the membranous labyrinth is more on the inside, so it's kind of like a tube within a tube. And so the molar labyrinth is filled with perilymph, and then it has those three divisions: vestibule, semicircular canal, and cochlea. And the membranous labyrinth is filled with endolymph. So the receptors for balance. So I'm gonna drink some water. Refreshing. Okay. So that is the cristae ampullaris. Okay, and then we have specialized hair cells called on the organ of Corti that helps us with sound. So we have balance and we have sound. So here is kind of a general overview of the regions. The cochlea is for hearing. The vestibule is for equilibrium, and the semicircular canals is for equilibrium as well. Okay, and so sense of hearing is here. Okay, and then the utricle and the saccule in the vestibule, and then the semicircular canals are all for equilibrium. Okay, and here's just another picture. Okay, here's some videos that I would greatly encourage you to watch. Hopefully we'll post them on topics, but I'll post the links, but if you look these up in YouTube, very helpful. And so the cochlea is a spiral conical bony chamber. It contains a cochlear duct which houses the organ of Corti. That's a big name that you need to know and star. And so it's a spiral organ. So the organ of Corti is a receptor organ for hearing. It's a masterpiece of cellular microarchitecture. It's engineered. This highly varied strip of epithelial cells allows for transduction of auditory signals, so what we're hearing, into nerve pulses, action potential. So we're going from sound energy, and then we're changing that to mechanical, or movement energy, and then we're changing it into electrical energy. Pretty crazy stuff if you think about it. And then there's some video. And so so it's like a micro piano. So you have these hair cells. Notice the incoming and the outgoing oval window. So the stapes rests on this. And so as it vibrates differently for different hertz. So highs down here, of course, frequencies, and lows at the apex. So that's called the apex. And this is the low region. Okay. And you basically have hair cells that correspond to each hertz frequency. So you basically have like this micro piano in your cochlea. I mean, this is engineering. This is design. This is beauty and complexity and all wrapped into one. So here is what it looks like. So the scala tympani and the scala vestibuli and the scala media is in the middle. Okay. And then the spiral organ of Corti is right there. Okay. And this is the basilar membrane. So this is the tectoral membrane right here. This is the tectoral membrane. This is the basilar membrane. We're going to see that in a second. And so here's the tectoral membrane. It rests on the hair cells. And so here's the hair cells, stereocilia, specialized cells. And so what happens is the sound kind of moves this membrane and it hits these cells and action potentials happen. And then they send fibers to the cochlear nerve to let us hear. And then there's a basilar membrane, which means what it's resting on. Sorry about that. And so this is from a great movie. I'm a little partial because it made the year I was born. But Back to the Future. And so this huge amp right here, and it's a funny scene. He turns it on, he like flies back. But hair cells do not regenerate in humans. They can be permanently damaged by loud noise. So loud music, I talked to you about it in class, but nonetheless, if you didn't hear me in class, that's a nice pun. But if you didn't hear me in class, I sometimes walk by with students when they're working and they have earbuds in or whatever, and of course, Beats are back in and the bigger headphones, and it's like, man, if I can hear your music, that's way too loud. And so it's not like I'm annoyed, although sometimes I am with the music choice, but I'm also concerned, right? Because I want you to be able to hear your grandchildren and your children talk to you. This is a scanning electron microscope, kind of zooming in on what these hair cells look like. Color's been added. We don't really see color. And so here's the auditory pathway. You don't have to know this. This is just kind of showing you how it goes from the spiral organ of Corti and the different places in the medulla. And then you got a midbrain connection, and then it goes to the primary auditory cortex and the temporal lobe to understand again, we hear with our brains. Our ear is the receiving organ, specifically the organ of Corti. Okay, so here's the auditory pathway for your notes. You can kind of go through that and see what's happening there. Balance. Vertigo. Can you imagine standing up? Well, not standing up because that's low blood pressure sometimes. But can you imagine just going about your day being nauseated and struggling to find your balance? That'd be tough, right? And so how this works is that the other part of the inner ear is involved in the interpretation of static equilibrium and linear acceleration. So think about when you've linearly accelerated. And so these regions known as maculae, which consist of hair cells with stereocilia and kinocilium, they have this otolithic membrane. And they're weighted down by these calcium carbonate stones called otoliths. And so these otoliths move based upon head position and gravity. Okay? And as it moves, you can see the picture here, it moves the hair cells, stimulating an action potential, which transmits to the brain to let us know our head's moving. Okay? And so as the head is accelerated or tipped by gravity, the otoliths cause the cilia to bend, so the position of the head's been changed. Visual cues also play a part in this, so your eyes are helping as well. So, you ever been have motion sickness? Or getting sick off a ride or something like that, or one of those simulators? When the visual and vestibular cues are not synchronized, a sense of imbalance or nausea can occur. Okay, motion sickness is a prime example of that. The semicircular canals detect change in acceleration and deceleration. So you can see here that there's otoliths again, hair cells, and here's that ampullae of Christi, the ampulla of the semicircular canal. And you can see that there's different ways our head can move. And what's beautiful about this engineering is the three ducts are each at 90 degrees to one another, so we can sense all the movements we make. So you can see right here, left and right, turning, extending and flexing. And so inside, and we're almost done. Thank you for staying with me. Sorry, my throat's a little shot. Inside are clusters of hair cells and support cells. And these are called crista ampullaris. These cells have stereocilia and a kinocilium enclosed in a gelatinous material called the cupula. So there's that guy. And as endolymph flows over the cupula, it opens those channels, ions rush in, signal is sent. So here is an example of that. Now, sometimes those otoliths can become dislodged from where they're supposed to be, and they can kind of just rest in there when they're not supposed to be in there. And that can lead to vertigo. Here's a nice picture of the vestibular cochlear nerve. 2 branches, and then it joins into one nerve, which is the 8th cranial nerve. Helps you know where you are in space, your head position, acceleration. And so just to close it out, protect your ears. Here's how sound travels to the brain. And then tonight is that ringing. I had a few questions at the end of your packet for that. I hope this was helpful to you. More importantly, I hope that you have ears to hear what our good Lord has to say to us. God bless.